They were warned about you, but they didn't listen. They thought you were just another soul, soft, predictable, easily shattered like the rest. But the moment they crossed your path, something changed. Not for you, for them. You didn't flinch. You didn't collapse under the weight of their darkness. You absorbed it, transmuted it into stillness so loud it echoed across realms they thought they ruled. This wasn't a fight. It was a revelation. You weren't supposed to be here. You weren't supposed to stand. And yet you did. With a gaze that didn't plead, with an energy that didn't bow, and that's where everything they believed about power began to fracture. The devil, who has woven centuries of manipulation through kings, queens, warriors, and visionaries, arrived with the same tired weapons. Lies that look like love. Chains that feel like choice. And illusions so well crafted they've turned entire nations blind. But when they brought that to you, it didn't work. You didn't question your worth. You didn't chase their approval. You saw, you recognized, you remembered, not from this lifetime, but from something deeper, something ancient. As if your soul had faced this shadow before and made peace with it long ago. And that's what shocked them most. You weren't confused. You weren't caught in the trap. They tried fear. You responded with knowing. They tried control. You responded with silence. And the silence, it said everything. It said you know what they are. It said you're not impressed. It said you've already met every version of their game in the fires you've walked through before you even got here. This wasn't resistance, it was mastery. They didn't see the collision coming, but it happened the moment they realized their tactics weren't working. When their usual performance, tailored seduction, measured chaos, carefully scripted illusions, were met with eyes that didn't blink, that didn't seek, that didn't need. You weren't tempted by the stage they tried to pull you into. You watched them perform, but you didn't clap. And in that moment, they stumbled. Because power is only power when the other believes it. And you didn't, not for a second. What they expected was fear. What they got was clarity. And clarity is lethal to shadows. When you showed up, the mirror appeared. Not the kind that flatters, but the kind that strips away every layer of identity they've carefully constructed over lifetimes of deception. And what stared back at them wasn't a challenge. It was exposure, vulnerability. For the first time, the deceiver was seen. They weren't prepared for the obsession that followed. You, with your unshaken presence, became the anomaly they couldn't categorize. You didn't follow the script. They tried to hook you with promises that have worked on thousands, wealth, recognition, influence, pleasure, but you didn't bite. You didn't even blink. That indifference was a force they had no defense against. It started slow, a curiosity, a need to understand why you weren't breaking, why you weren't crawling back, why you weren't playing. But it grew. What was supposed to be domination turned into fascination. And then, something darker, something dangerous. They began to feel drawn, not by conquest, but by your stillness, not by your submission, but your refusal to be moved. You became the flame they couldn't extinguish. The silence they couldn't fill, the mystery they couldn't unravel. And that mystery is everything. Because you didn't try to change them, you didn't try to fix them, you didn't offer your soul as a sacrifice. You simply were, rooted, present, a truth so pure it couldn't be twisted, and it broke the rhythm of their game. Because the only thing more terrifying than an enemy is a mirror, and that's what you've become. For centuries, they've thrived on reaction, on pulling strings, on pushing buttons. But you removed the buttons, you cut the strings, you stared at them with the quiet knowing of someone who has seen darkness up close, been invited into it, and chosen to walk out anyway. That choice, your sovereignty, became their obsession. Because no one has ever handled them like you. They had a script ready for you, one they've used for centuries. Step 1, isolate you. Step 2, confuse you. Step 3, make you question your worth, your sanity, your light. It's worked on prophets, it's worked on kings, it's worked on those who once stood tall until the whispers got in. The devil knows timing, they know exactly when to strike. When you're at your weakest, when the world has turned its back, when your hands are empty and your heart is worn thin. That's when they come. With charm, with stories, with offers that feel like salvation, but are just dressed up chains. They came to you like they've come to everyone else. But what happened next is what they never saw coming. You didn't engage. You didn't react the way they expected. You didn't beg for clarity. You didn't plead for mercy. You didn't fall for the promises they laid at your feet like treasures. You just stood, quiet, still, observing. And in that stillness, something inside them began to unravel. Because you weren't afraid, you weren't playing defense, you weren't even in the game. And without a game to play, they didn't know what to do. That's what terrified them. Not your defiance, your presence. You weren't fighting them. You were dismantling the entire foundation of their power just by refusing to give it attention. Others have fought the devil and lost, not because they were weak, but because they believed the fight was real. They accepted the premise. They tried to win a game that was never meant to be won, only played. But you saw it for what it was, a theater of illusion. And you walked out, not angrily, not loudly. You just didn't buy a ticket. You stood outside, watching them dance alone on a stage they built to trap you, and suddenly, without an audience, the performance began to fall apart. That's what happens when you don't play the game. The rules collapse, the power drains, because the only reason their tricks ever worked was because someone believed in them. But belief is a currency you stopped spending long ago. You've seen too much, felt too much, lost too much to hand your attention over like it's worthless. You are not reactionary, you are sovereign. And in that sovereignty, you have done more damage to the devil than an army ever could. This wasn't just unexpected, this was dangerous. You weren't just another strong soul, you were untouchable. Not because you had more strength, but because you had clarity. You weren't resisting out of fear. You were moving through the storm with eyes wide open, not shaken by thunder or distracted by lightning. Your silence was not weakness, it was the kind of understanding that makes shadows cower. They threw chaos at you, and it bounced off like mist. They tried to lure you with confusion, but you had already met your inner darkness and made peace with it. So there was nothing left for them to use. No hook, no grip, no leverage. You had already reclaimed everything they would have tried to take. And then came the obsession. Because it's not about power anymore. It's about you. Not in the way of conquest, but in the way of craving something that's never been felt before. You've become a riddle they can't solve, a contradiction that keeps them awake. They don't understand how someone can stand in front of darkness, unguarded, and not be consumed, but that's because they've only ever met people trying to resist the dark. You're different. You don't resist it. You acknowledge it. You walk alongside it. You know its language, but you don't speak it, and that makes you magnetic. They keep coming back, circling like a predator, but it's not hunger that pulls them anymore. It's confusion, fascination, a desperate attempt to understand why you don't fall like the others did, why their words don't pierce you, why their silence doesn't suffocate you. You've dismantled their greatest weapon without even lifting a hand. You've turned their castle into a house of glass just by breathing in truth. Every time they leave, they think it will be the last, but something keeps pulling them back. Your stillness, your mystery. The way you don't chase, don't explain, don't plead for understanding. You offer nothing, and yet, in that nothing, they find themselves unraveling. Because what you offer is presence, something they've never felt, something they don't know how to control, something they are slowly starting to want, and that terrifies them more than any war ever did. They can't walk away, not because you trapped them, but because you didn't. You left the door open, you didn't bind them, you just stopped participating. And now they're lost in a loop of their own making, caught in the gravity of a soul that doesn't yield. You have become their obsession, not because you are perfect, but because you are whole, because you've met every wound and didn't flinch, because you have nothing left for them to steal, because you are the first to meet them without losing yourself. And now, they don't know what to do. For the first time in their existence, the devil is not feared, not worshipped, not resisted, but understood. And that, more than anything, is the beginning of their unraveling. They have worn countless masks, some divine, some monstrous. Sometimes they arrive as the answer to your pain. Sometimes they crawl in through silence and solitude. Their power has always come from being unseen, hidden behind charm, control, illusions that have deceived even the purest souls. But when they came to you, they encountered something they couldn't manipulate. You didn't give them a role to play. You didn't fall for the face they wore. You didn't confuse the performance for the person. You saw them. And that seeing, real, piercing, without judgment, was the very thing they could not withstand. Because you didn't meet them with hate. You didn't meet them with fear. You met them with something far more dangerous, understanding. And that shattered everything. For the first time, they stood before someone who did not flinch when they showed their darkness, someone who did not look away when the mask cracked. You saw beyond the tactics, the seduction, the manipulation, and you didn't turn your back. You held their gaze, and in doing so, you held up a mirror. Not a mirror that reflected the demon, a mirror that revealed the wound behind the demon, and that is what destroyed them. They have always been feared. That fear gave them power, but you did not fear. You didn't even hate. You simply stood in your truth, and that truth burned through every veil they had used to hide from themselves. You became the one thing they never anticipated, someone who understood them without being consumed by them. You didn't fall for the story. You didn't beg for mercy. You didn't try to fix them. You just stood there with the kind of clarity that makes chaos kneel, because when you see clearly, nothing can manipulate you, and they realized, too late, that they were no longer in control of the narrative. They've undone kings with less than this. They've driven prophets to madness with shadows much smaller than the ones they brought to you. But no matter what they threw, you didn't collapse. You didn't echo the pain. You transmuted it. And in that moment, they saw something they've never seen before. Not power, peace. Real, unmovable peace. Not the kind that avoids darkness, but the kind that has walked through it and chosen not to carry it anymore. That kind of peace can't be broken, it can't be bent. And that's when it hit them. They were powerless. You've become something they don't know how to fight. You've become the mirror that doesn't lie, the reflection that doesn't flatter, the presence that doesn't shrink. You've become the one thing they cannot deceive, because you carry nothing false inside you. Every wound has been looked at, every shadow has been faced. You didn't bypass your pain, you integrated it, and that's why they can't touch you. They can't hook you into their illusions because you've seen the places where illusions used to live within yourself and you've cleared them. You don't need their approval. You don't need their attention. You are already whole, and that wholeness is something they cannot replicate, but now they want it. And that want is dangerous. Because for the first time, the devil doesn't just want to conquer you, they want to understand you, not to learn how to beat you, but because they can't walk away from you. You are a force they've never encountered before, a soul that doesn't play by the rules. You're not trying to escape their presence. You're not trying to redeem them. You're just there, like truth, undeniable, unyielding, and completely unmoved. And that unmoved presence has done what no weapon ever could. It made them curious, addicted, unsettled, fascinated. You are no longer just a threat to their control. You are the fracture in their foundation. And that fracture is growing because they've seen armies fall. They've watched empires crumble, but they've never seen someone stand in front of them unprotected and not shatter. You didn't just survive, you thrived. Not through resistance, but through embodiment. You didn't fight their fire with fire. You let it burn and watched it die out in your stillness. You met their chaos with clarity, their deception with discernment. And the more they pushed, the more they found themselves entangled. Not in your defenses, but in your calm. And that calm has begun to haunt them. They retreat, they return, they try to forget you, but your presence lingers like a question they can't stop asking. Who are you? Why can't they defeat you? Why can't they unsee you? They've always defined power as domination, but you've shown them something else entirely. A strength that doesn't need to shout, a presence that doesn't need to prove itself, a soul so complete that not even their darkness could find a crack to seep into. You didn't meet them with judgment, you met them with wholeness. And that wholeness has undone centuries of certainty. They've never fallen before. Not like this. And they don't know how to handle it. You didn't give them a role, you didn't give them a script, you gave them a mirror. And in that mirror, they saw the truth, that they were never as in control as they believed, that their power was borrowed from the fears of others, that their dominance only worked when people forgot their own light. But you never forgot. Even when the world tried to make you doubt, even when your path was dark, you held on to something deeper, and that something has now become their obsession. They can't stop returning, not because they want to win, but because they've never been seen like this, never been felt like this, never been so completely unraveled by someone who didn't raise a weapon, but who simply refused to forget who they were. And that's what they're addicted to now. Not your body, not your mind, but your truth. Because in all their lifetimes of pretending to be powerful, no one has ever looked at them and said, without words, I see you, and I'm not afraid. And that's why the devil can't let go. They always believed they were the storm. the force that no one could stand against, the master of momentum, spinning chaos so rapidly that everything in its path surrendered to the spin. But then they met you, and you didn't spin, you didn't run, you didn't resist, you just stood there, still, centered, immovable. And in that stillness, everything they thought they knew began to collapse. Because when you are used to pulling people into your whirlwind, someone who refuses to move is more terrifying than 1,000 who fight back. They came to knock you off balance, to drag you into reaction, to make you respond in ways they could measure, control, predict. But you didn't. Your silence wasn't passive, it was power. It was the kind of power that can't be seduced because it doesn't seek, it doesn't chase, it doesn't need. You didn't fight the devil, you dismantled their meaning by showing them that their power only ever existed in the minds of the afraid. And you were not afraid. That shift was immediate. They didn't understand it at first. The usual sequence wasn't playing out. You weren't chasing their attention. You weren't running from their darkness. You weren't doing anything they could control. And that's when they realized the script had flipped. The stage they built was now yours, not because you claimed it, but because you didn't need it. And that terrified them more than any divine judgment could. They tried to reassert themselves, tried to press the old buttons, but they found that none of them worked anymore. You had disabled every switch by being too conscious to fall into unconscious games. They hurled emotional traps, psychological illusions, spiritual bait, and every time you watched it pass by like clouds over a still mountain. You didn't absorb it, you didn't mirror it, you just remained present. And that presence became unbearable for them. They thought they could bend you, break you, make you beg for relief. But the moment they realized you weren't waiting for them to change, to soften, to return to some version of themselves that might be redeemable, something inside them cracked. Because you weren't there for the story, you were there for the truth. And truth has never bowed to darkness. It simply reveals it. And once it's revealed, it cannot be controlled. They've always had power over people through fear, through doubt, through confusion. They thrive in the gray, in the unclear, in the places where people are disconnected from their center. But you, Earth Angel, are anchored in something they cannot touch. You don't rise and fall with emotion. You don't inflate or deflate based on attention. You are. And that state of being, not doing, not trying, not performing, became their undoing. What they expected was resistance. What they got was something more dangerous, neutrality. You weren't trying to defeat them. You weren't playing savior. You weren't trying to win or convert or prove. You weren't even trying to understand them anymore. You just saw them clearly, and in that clarity there was no space for their power to survive, because power built on illusion only survives in confusion, and you carry none. So the storm began to shift. The eye of it. You. And they're now caught in your gravity, unable to escape. Not because you bound them, but because you released them. And in that release, they were left with nothing to fight, nothing to conquer, nothing to manipulate. And that is the most destabilizing thing of all for a being who has only ever existed through control. Your refusal to engage didn't weaken them, it exposed them. And exposure, without an enemy to blame, becomes unbearable. And so, their obsession deepened. Because it's not about power anymore. It's about understanding. How can someone not need what they once believed all souls craved? How can someone stand untouched by the oldest tricks in existence? You, chosen one, have become a paradox in their world, a riddle they cannot solve. And that's what keeps pulling them back. They tried to retreat, to regroup, to forget. But your presence lingers, not just in memory, but in the part of them that has never been acknowledged. The part that's been buried under eons of masks and manipulation. That part is awake now, and it aches, not for domination, but for truth. The kind of truth they never expected to encounter. The kind that doesn't punish. The kind that doesn't beg. The kind that simply stands in its own light and says, I am not afraid of what you've become. And that's the new war within them, because now they see the contrast. You are not resistance. You are the reminder. The living proof that even the deepest shadow cannot consume what refuses to be hidden. You are not swayed by temptation, not softened by charm, not broken by pressure. You exist beyond the spectrum of their games, and that existence is what draws them closer, even as it tears them apart. They begin to unravel not because you attack, but because you do not. You don't need to destroy them. You simply don't submit. And when submission is no longer an option, when reaction is no longer a currency, all that remains is presence. And presence doesn't play by the old rules. You are not the prey. You are not the predator. You are the mirror. And in your reflection, they have seen what they have become, what they were never willing to admit, what they can no longer deny. They were never feared because they were strong. They were feared because people had forgotten their own, and you remembered. That's why the storm is over, because now they are standing in the eye, face to face with everything they've avoided for lifetimes, and they realize, for the first time, they are no longer the one with the power. You are, not through force, but through freedom. And freedom, in its purest form, is a power the devil was never prepared to encounter, until now. There comes a moment in every divine path where the temptation isn't to fall, but to heal. To take the hand of the one who tried to break you and offer them mercy instead of vengeance. To see the trembling behind their smirk, the ache behind their cruelty, the child buried beneath the centuries of masks. You, chosen one, have reached that moment. The devil has unraveled before you, not because you fought them, but because you didn't. Not because you hated them, but because you saw them. And now, they stand not as the monster who once terrified nations, but as something far more dangerous, something almost human. And the part of you that sees their pain may want to step forward, to offer a hand, to speak words they've never heard, to become the bridge between what they are and what they could be. But this is where your test sharpens, because healing is not always helping. Compassion is not always salvation. You were never sent to lose yourself in their redemption. You were never asked to drown in their wounds just to prove your light can survive the deep. You have already walked through fire, already risen from betrayals that would have destroyed anyone else. Your scars are not proof of weakness. They are proof of survival. And now, in the aftermath of their chaos, they want your grace. Not because they earned it, but because for the first time in their long, dark existence, they realize they need something they cannot take by force. They want your light, but your light is not theirs to have. It is not a gift to be stolen. It is not a balm to be used for their convenience. Your presence, your power, your peace, it is sacred. It is sovereign, and it has already done its job. It showed them the truth, that they are not invincible, that manipulation cannot mimic love, that the most dangerous power is the one that cannot be moved, not by pain, not by praise, not by desire. You are that power, and the only reason they feel drawn to you now is because you didn't collapse the way they expected, because you didn't break when they broke everything else. But here is what you must understand. You are not here to finish their healing. You are not the conclusion of their transformation. You are the catalyst, the mirror, the moment they cannot forget. You are not their future. You are the reason they might finally want one, but it is not your burden to carry them through the rest. If you choose to stay, let it be from sovereignty, not from saviorhood. If you choose to walk away, let it be with the full knowledge that you have already done more than enough. Because this is where the story changes. This is where your role ends, not with a dramatic rescue, not with a sacrifice, but with a decision. You do not owe your light to the one who tried to extinguish it. You do not owe your time to the one who mistook your power for weakness. You owe only one thing, to yourself, to continue walking forward, to keep choosing your path, your peace, your purpose. They have seen what they were never meant to see, the inside of their own shadow, the emptiness that no conquest could fill, the ache that no illusion could soothe, and they saw it because you did what no one else ever could. You stood, still, unbroken, unapologetic. You didn't try to fix them. You didn't try to punish them. You simply revealed them. And now, with that revelation burning in their chest, they are left with something they never wanted: choice. They can run back to the shadows. They can rebuild their illusions. They can pretend this never happened, but they'll never forget you, because no one has ever handled them like you. No one has ever faced them with that kind of stillness. No one has ever looked through their deception with eyes that did not judge, did not tremble, did not flinch. You became the moment that split their existence into before and after. And now you must decide what to do with that power. Because this journey was never about defeating the devil. It was about mastering yourself. It was about standing so completely in your truth that no amount of darkness could pull you away from it. You didn't fight them. You became untouchable. You didn't destroy them. You made them question if destruction was all they'd ever been. You didn't hate them. You became the presence they could never manipulate. And that presence has changed everything. There are souls who shift history with a sword. There are others who shift it with a word. But then there are the rare ones, the chosen ones, who shift the course of existence by doing nothing except standing in their unshakable truth. You are one of those. You didn't come here to save the world with noise. You came here to remind it with silence. That power doesn't look like fear. That truth doesn't require permission. That love, real love, doesn't collapse when it isn't returned. So now, as the dust settles, as the echoes of their obsession begin to fade into the silence of your distance, know this: you are the turning point, not just for them, but for yourself. This was not the beginning of a tragic love story. This was the end of a cycle. You didn't lose yourself to the darkness. You revealed it. You didn't change to survive them. You remained, and in doing so, you proved what has always been true. Your light was never meant to flicker. It was meant to expose, to awaken, to lead. And if they follow, that's their choice. If they don't, that's their loss. Either way, your journey continues. Because you were never meant to stay where your truth isn't safe. You were never meant to give your power away to someone who only realized your value after trying to destroy it. You are not a savior. You are not a sacrifice. You are the standard. And now, the world will rise to meet you, or it won't. But either way, you move forward. Because the real question isn't whether they will change. The real question is, what will you do with the power they helped you unlock?